I met the right people at the right time who said, there's other things that to do in life. And luckily, Pfizer gave me a lucky break in Mumbai. And then, I just carried on since then. Once I got a taste of what healthcare looks like outside the hospital, I don't think I could ever go back. I think it's a massive industry. There's a lot happening. So I work primarily with healthcare clients.
Hello, hustlers. Welcome to our channel. Today with us we have Dr. Rohan sir, who did his MBBS from St. John Medical College, after which he did his MBA from HAAS School of Business, University of California, Berkeley. So in this podcast, we will be deep diving in his journey, and also we will try to get his insights about healthcare. So welcome Dr. Rohan sir to our channel.
Thank you.
I would like to brief the agenda of this channel. I started this channel? There are many aspirants who are looking to transition their career from clinical to non-clinical side of healthcare. But insights or the information that is available are very limited. And also there are very less number of professionals who have transitioned their career. So this will serve as guide for them, so they can consider this path as an alternate career for them. So, sir, this was the agenda of the channel, and also I gave a very short introduction about you, but I would like you to introduce to our audience.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. First, thanks for having me on. I just wanted to say at the offset that this is my own personal views and not a representation of my company's or the organization I work for. Yep. Thank you for the introduction. I think that covered the highlights. After my MBBS, and I know we're going to talk about this in more detail today. I was deciding on whether to go through the NEET process or not. Fortunately, unfortunately, it didn't work out and I didn't get the seat I wanted and managed to transition out. And since then, it's been a really interesting journey across pharma, medical devices, consulting. I've really been exploring healthcare as much as I can. It's a massive industry, and so I've definitely enjoyed every minute of it.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for the introduction. So we will be diving into the discussion now. The very first question I would like to ask you: what made you to transition from clinical to the non-clinical side of healthcare?
I mean, like I said in my introduction, I think a lot of it was more circumstance than anything else. I went through the NEET process, didn't get what I wanted, ended up only in, like non-clinical seats. And the question was whether to try the exam again or that was pretty much the only option I was given. And then I met the right people at the right time who said, there's other things that to do in life. The healthcare sector is much bigger than what happens in the hospital. And so they pushed me to try something, that's, I guess, slightly outside of the typical career paths that we follow out of medical school. And luckily, Pfizer gave me a lucky break in Mumbai. And then, I just carried on since then. Once I got a taste of what healthcare looks like outside the hospital, I don't think I could ever go back. I think it's a massive industry. There's a lot happening. There's so many options, to be honest. And, we saw with the pandemic as well as or everything else that's going on in healthcare, there's so much cutting edge science in it. And there's so many interesting things going on that I don't think I could ever go back to the hospital again.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for the wonderful insights. Sir, I would like to ask you, what is your current job and what is your role in the firm?
Sure. So I work at PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC, which is a consulting firm. So very similar to the other big names like the McKinseys, Deloitte's, Ernst and Young's of the world. Typically, what consulting firms do is they help clients or organizations with specific problems. And so I work primarily with healthcare clients, and we help them with, a specific issue that they have a problem with. So for example, if a company is trying to launch a drug and trying to figure out the best way to do it, or if they already have a particular drug and they want to expand their access to, the patient population or expand access to a new country, for example, how do they do that? If they want to acquire a company or acquire a particular drug or set of drugs, how should they do it? How should they be thinking about it, etc. So I think the breadth of projects that I've worked on is really broad. I'm normally part of a team of anything between 5 to maybe sometimes even 20 people that typically works with clients end to end. And creates the strategy for them, hands it over, and then either we implement it as a separate project or the company takes the strategy and then implements it themselves. But day to day, that's typically what I do as part of my team.
All right, sir. So if someone wants to pursue a career as you are doing, what do you think should be the roadmap for him or her?
Um, So, I mean, for consulting in particular, I think most people jump in post an MBA. And so if once you've got an MBA, that's the easiest way that consulting firms pick up new talent. Regardless of whether you do it in India, Singapore, the UK, the US, wherever you get your degree. That being said, there's a lot of people who also go in without an MBA. It's not the only path to get in. So I think there's different routes. The MBA typically tends to be the easier way to get in, but I know a lot of people who have gone in the other direction as well and gotten in without an MBA. So it really depends on where you are career-wise, age-wise, priority-wise. And that's from a consulting perspective. Thinking about like pharma and the other industries I've worked in, you can typically break in right out of your MBBS, or some people do MD pharmacology and then break in. And so there's different ways to break into the sector. There's pros and cons of doing an MD or an MS after an MBBS and breaking in. And in my case, I think it's slightly rarer, but now it's slowly becoming more popular, where rather than waiting to finish an MD or an MS and then get into the non-clinical world, they're doing it straight out of an MBBS. And I mean, that's a personal choice more than anything else. I'm obviously going to be biased in, going from MBBS right into the industry, but there's lots of people who prefer getting those 3 years under your belt in an MD or an MS and then breaking in. And I'm happy to talk about those pros and cons as well. But yeah, I mean, it really, as long as you have your MBBS, it's a really strong degree. You don't underestimate how much effort, time, and value it has in the bigger, larger healthcare ecosystem. And so it really depends on where you are in life.
All right, sir. So what is the admission procedure to get into an MBA college?
I think so. MBAs depend on whether you want to stay in India or go to the US or go to the UK or wherever you want to get your MBA. I think there's a couple of questions you need to ask before that. Number one is the MBA right for you? Is the first question. Everyone does an MBA because they think that it's going to open a lot of doors, which it does. Don't get me wrong. It opens up a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, you can end up at the end of a 2-year MBA and still be lost. And so it's really useful to think of a couple of things before deciding to apply for an MBA. One is, have a basic sense of what you want to do. And so I typically tell people not to do an MBA right out of an MBBS. In my opinion, that's not the best way to go about it for a couple of reasons. One is you're going to get to an end of an MBA and apply to, say you want to go to Pfizer or Novartis. You're going to be one of thousands of MBAs applying to this company for 5 or 6 positions, and everyone applying with you is also an MBA. And so your classes and your degree are in no way a differentiator in your application. The only thing they have to differentiate you from the thousands or if not more people applying is what you've done before your MBA. And so if you've gone in with zero work experience, they really don't have any reason to choose you over someone who, say, worked at Google for a couple of years or worked at Deloitte for 2 years or 3 years before an MBA. And so I've always encouraged people to work for a couple of years before even considering applying. One is it gives you a leg up when you're applying for jobs after your MBA, one. And two is it also helps you try and identify what you like and don't like. When you're sitting in a hospital or sitting, in a pharmacology department or a pathology lab, you have no clue what's going on in the broader industry. You might be reading newsletters, but you're not working on a day-to-day basis in these companies. And so there's a huge knowledge gap that needs to be bridged, and it's always useful to do that before an MBA. So I think that's the one big reason. The second one is apply for an MBA depending on where you want to live. And so if you want to live in the UK, apply for an MBA there. If you want to live in the US, apply for an MBA there. Same with Singapore, Australia, wherever you want to apply. If you apply in the UK, the odds of you getting a job in the US are very, very low. Or the same way the other way around. If you apply in the US and you want a job in, say, Singapore, it's much, much harder to do. And so typically figure out where you want to live and, ideally settle down. And that's how my thought process worked as well. So I think those are the two big things to ask before you apply. Once you decide to apply, there's CAT, there's GMAT, there's GRE, there's a whole bunch of exams that obviously go into it, and you can't avoid those. Some schools do offer you an option to apply without writing one of those exams. And I mean, I haven't gone through that process, to be honest, so I don't know what it looks like in the post COVID. But yeah, you typically do one of those exams. You ideally need to have anything between 3 to 5 years of experience, 2 to 5 years of experience under your belt, depending on which country you're applying to. In the US, most people have about 4 or 5 years of experience before their MBA. And so you want to be close to what that class average looks like. It's sometimes they consider it slightly different for doctors because our undergrad degree is so much longer than everyone else. So you could potentially count your internship as a year of work experience. But in my head, it's fine for an application, but for your own discovery and for you to figure out what you want to do, I don't consider that internship as work experience in my head. It was part of my MBBS experience. And then everything after that was part of my post MBBS experience. And so I would say between 3 to 4 years is a good middle path for you to get some work experience in the industry and then do an MBA. But yeah, the process is largely the same regardless of whether you're applying in the US or India. There's a few differences on which exam you're writing as well as how much work experience you ideally need. But they do tend to be quite subjective. There's been lots of doctors, especially the ones that I studied with in Berkeley, who came in with sometimes a year, sometimes even less than a year of work experience, and they still got in. So there's no hard and fast rule that you need 4 years of work experience. You can get in with less as well, but it sometimes gives you a better fighting chance of getting through that very, very, it's a rigorous admission process, if you do have a couple more years under your belt.
All right, so that was a very great insight. Can you walk us through your timeline for the admission procedure? Like when did you start preparing for, if you appeared for any exam, any language proficiency test, then the essays and interviews, whatever comes on the way?
Yeah, sure. So I applied for my for my MBA in 2018, and I started my MBA in 2019. But I did my GMAT while I was working. And so while I was at Pfizer, I finished my GMAT exam in 2017. You ideally want to get a good score because that's going to be, it's definitely going to be a big part of your application. They typically, the one thing I'll caveat that with is a big part of the MBA is the brand. And I'll give you a simple analogy. If a person graduates from AIMS Delhi, that's going to be AIMS Delhi or JIPMO or CMC Vellore. That's going to be a much bigger name than a lot of, there's thousands of medical colleges in India. And so when you're applying for a job, if they see AIMS Delhi and they see someone with another medical degree that maybe is not in the top 30 or top 40, the person from AIMS is definitely going to have a leg up. They may have the same experience, the same degree, the same everything, but just because that person's from AIMS Delhi, they're going to have a leg up in the application process. And so brand makes a very, very big difference. And it's the same for an MBA. And so ideally, you want to be going to a school which has a bigger brand, because that's going to make a big difference when you're applying for jobs. When you apply for jobs after your MBA, in the same way that AIMS Delhi was above me and above you, it's going to be the same for an MBA as well. If there's a person from Harvard or Wharton or Stanford, they're probably going to be higher up in the in the application process than I am. And so that's a important thing to think about. It's not just about having an MBA. You also want to make the most of an MBA. And so typically the better the MBA program, the higher chance you're going to get a better job, the higher chance you're going to get a better compensation after your MBA. You're going to be able to, you're going to have a better network because of your MBA. And so there's a lot of perks from being in, a top 10, top 15 MBA program. And that's why they're so competitive. And so the way I was thinking about it was I only wanted a top 10 MBA. Given how expensive an MBA is, it didn't make sense to apply for anything outside of the top 10 because my return on my investment, especially when you convert from rupees to dollars, it's a lot of money to be spending on education. And you definitely don't want to be spending that money if you don't think it's worth the investment. And so I only applied to top 10 schools. I didn't apply outside of that. And so I started the process as early as possible. You typically, GRE is slightly different. I applied for GMAT. I wrote my GMAT exam, which is to be math and English. They say you need to have a 700 plus out of 800. That's ideally what the score that you need to get if you're trying to apply to a top 10, top 15, even top 20 school, to be honest. And so my goal was 700 or above, and that was it. And so I got 700 and I refused to write that exam again because it's part of a larger profile, right? So your exam is one part of it. Your degree, undergrad degree is one part of it. Your work experience is a different part of it. And so because I had an MBBS, which is slightly different from the thousands and thousands of other people applying, I had 4 years of work experience across healthcare and I have a 700. I can get away with a slightly lower score because my profile's stronger and is slightly more different than everyone else. I've not done an engineering degree. I've not done, I've not gone to a typical consulting firm or a tech company, which is where most other Indians are going to, where most other Indians are going to apply from. And so I got my 700 and just applied with that. And so when you're thinking about an application, one, get the exam right. Two is you need to have a good story to tell. And the more experience you have, the more you'd have to talk about. Because, you need to explain why you want to be in that school and why you deserve that school, but also why the school is a good fit for you. So it works both ways. And so the more experience you have, the better story you're going to be able to communicate to the school and to the people who are going to review your application. So that's the second part of it. And then the third is your resume. And I feel like that's one of the most underestimated parts of moving out of medicine. Nobody teaches you how to write a resume in medical college. And so, and I mean, I remember when I applied for my first job, my resume was awful. And years later, my first boss at Pfizer, I was getting coffee with her after I quit. And she was saying, "Oh my God, I remember how bad your resume was when you applied. It was one of the worst resumes I've seen." And it's not just me. We've never got taught how to write a resume. And so I feel like that's a really, really important skill to have for anyone who's in an MBBS right now and is whether you're considering applying outside of clinical medicine or not. A really, really important exercise to do is look up the consulting resume template. It's a one-page template. It's super simple, but there's certain ways in which you write each single bullet. It cannot be more than one page, and make sure you actually practice putting that on one piece of paper. It's a really important exercise, regardless of whether you want to be a surgeon or you want to be the CEO of a pharma company or the partner in a consulting firm. I think getting your resume right is an extremely important exercise. So that's the third. And then the fourth one is your letters of recommendation. And so you need to have people who are going to be able to vouch for you, send letters recommending you as a candidate. And so I had my bosses in pharma and medical devices submit a bunch. I had my ophthalmology professor at St. John's submit a letter of recommendation for me as well. And so those are the four components of the application. Again, this is more US and UK specific, maybe even Australia. India works slightly differently, and I'm not as familiar with the process in India, to be honest.
All right, sir. Then how can you share your experience about the interview?